So there's been some drama in the fashion world. For those of you who might not be in the know, Sarah Burton has stepped down as the creative director of Alexander McQueen. She just did her last show. I love Sarah Burton. I think she's done a fantastic job taking over the reins of Alexander McQueen after his really sad passing several years ago. But when she stepped down, Kering, who is basically the conglomerate that owns Alexander McQueen and Alexander McQueen in tandem, announced together that Sean McGear was going to be the new creative director of Alexander McQueen. And because of that, now all of the design houses that Kering owns, they all now look like this. These are all different people. I know it's hard to tell, but they are. Unsurprisingly, people are pissed. People are angry. People are so angry that both Alexander McQueen and Kering, they turned the comments off. Understandably, people are pissed, and rightly so. There's no women, there's no people of color, there's no disability rep, there's no diversity, there's no intersectionality, it's literally like a copy and paste of the same elder millennial Gen X guy. And in addition to that, and just people being frustrated, fashion and the interest in fashion has routinely and consistently been disparaged for being a feminine interest for generations. It is mocked for its femininity. People who are not femmes who are interested in fashion are usually criticized for being interested in fashion for its femininity. It is considered vain, it is considered frivolous, and essentially a waste of money, especially in North American culture. And yet, the leaders of some of the biggest luxury fashion houses in the world, the people who are responsible for setting trends, are all men. And so this actually made me think about the whole kind of broader discussion within fashion history, specifically by folks who are interested in historic fashions but are not actual dress historians or fashion historians, and a lot of pop history, where there's a lot of blame placed on the patriarchy for weird moments in women's fashions. So corsets are blamed on the patriarchy. The lack of women's pockets are blamed on the patriarchy. Restrictive skirts blamed on the patriarchy. Anything that was weird or odd or something that we don't really fully understand today about the why behind this fashion moment in history, it is usually just kind of blamed on the patriarchy. And when you actually get your hands in there, you get your hands a little dirty and you kind of dig into there, you'll realize that that doesn't really hold up with historic record. Now, don't get me wrong, do not misunderstand me. We can blame the patriarchy for 99 problems, but a bitch's outfit ain't necessarily one.
If you having girl problems, I feel bad for you, son. I got 99 problems, but
blaming the patriarchy on historic women's fashion trends isn't really one of them.
But when it comes to feminine fashions in the 18th to the 19th and very early 20th century, feminine fashions were created by women for women, and it was a women's space. And I will tell you the story of that and go more into depth here in just a moment. But with this whole announcement of Sean McGear at Alexander McQueen and this outcry, it made me realize something about this whole concept of the patriarchy in women's fashion. And it's that because we have a patriarchy problem in fashion today, we just assume that we had a patriarchy problem in fashion back then. So with that in mind, let me tell you the story about how women took control of women's fashion and then also completely revolutionized women's clothing, how we make clothing, the economy, the fashion industry, and women's rights in the entire process.
It's time for a quick, relaxing, chill sponsor break. The sponsor of this week's video is Beam's Dream Powder, which is a specialty hot chocolate that is only 15 calories with no added sugar, and it has actual ingredients to help promote a full and restful night's sleep. It has apigenin, which is the bioflavonoid that's found in chamomile. It has reishi mushrooms, which can help promote the body's natural sleep cycle, magnesium, which I love because it helps with muscle relaxation, sleep, and also, regularity. It also has L-theanine, which is an amino acid that helps with promoting sleep and rest and relaxation. And of course, the one I think everyone's familiar with, melatonin as well, which is a natural compound that helps with our body's natural circadian rhythms. I have the original cinnamon chocolate flavor as well as the chocolate peanut butter flavor. They're really delicious. I like to have mine actually with either some half and half or whole milk. And then I also do like to throw in an extra little scoop of protein powder just so I get that little extra bit of like protein at the end of the day. I think that's just a really nice way to kind of like end the evening. I am someone who really values my sleep, and I take getting sleep and getting a good night's rest really seriously. So having access to like a comfy, cozy, like hot chocolate that helps me get a good night's sleep is just so good. If you would like to give Beam's Dream Powder a try, you can subscribe and save 20%, or if you use my link in the description below, or just use my code AbbyCox, or just scan the QR code, you can get 15 additional % off plus a free milk frother, which means that you can get 35% off your subscription and the free milk frother just by using my code AbbyCox, the link below, or just scan this QR code to do some shopping from your phone. You can also pause, skip, or cancel your subscription at any time, so there's no risk involved. And so with that, a huge thank you to Beam's Dream Powder for sponsoring this video. And now let's get back to it.
The history of the mantua making trade. Before the 1600s, and during most of the 1600s, tailors were the makers of people's clothing. And in specific countries where there were guilds, the guilds were usually only allowed men to be active and participate. So what this means is that predominantly throughout history, tailors are male. And even today, when we talk about tailoring, we usually assume there is the male gender involved, that tailoring makes men's clothing and men are tailors, and that if you are a man who sews, you are almost automatically called a tailor, even if you are not actually a tailor and you make women's clothing. It is so deep in our etymology and our linguistic history that we have, understandably, there's nothing wrong with this, always associated men with tailoring and women with seamstressing. Now, I want to make this clear. Women have always worked alongside tailors. Women have always been working to make clothing, but because of government, because of the patriarchy, women were not allowed to join the Tailors Guild, and thus it put them at a disadvantage. They were not allowed the same rights. They were not allowed to participate in the business world in the same way. They couldn't own businesses in the same way. They couldn't earn wages in the same way. It kept women at a disadvantage, and this went on for centuries. Interestingly enough, like when you look at clothing, especially in the early 17th century, it is oddly gender neutral. Like women's clothes and men's clothes, especially the upper body garments, they look very similar. I don't know, I find that curious. But for women's clothing, what tailors would do is they would make the rigid structured upper bodice, or what we can call smooth covered stays today, and then the petticoats were the lower body garments. Because women's upper bodies were covered in this rigid structure of this boned bodice, these smooth covered stays, tailors were able to keep control over the making of women's clothing. Now, at the end of the 17th century, we do have the invention of a new style of garment, which I have talked about on this channel before, and that is the mantua. The mantua was this more relaxed, softer, looser fitting garment that was basically created on the wearer's body through a series of pleats and tucks and just stitching things down and pinning things down into place. It was a much more comfortable garment to wear. It was actually worn over a pair of stays, so you didn't need to have just bodice after bodice after bodice after bodice. You could have one pair of stays and wear this garment over top of it. It was considered a little bit more informal, therefore a little bit cheaper to make, therefore not as lucrative as stays and like smooth covered stays and bodices. And so the tailors just weren't as into it. And so women who were working alongside tailors and they were making these garments already, they were basically able to go and say, hey, you guys don't want to make these? And the tailors were like, no, why would we make those? Those are really dumb. We're gonna make like our stays, okay? And we're gonna like keep doing tailor stuff. And the women were like, cool, so we're just gonna do this over here. Is that okay? We're just gonna take this out of your shop and we're gonna go put it in our shop. And that's fine with you. And the tailors were like, yeah, whatever. Women are dumb. 'Cause I'm just kidding. Anywhere else I'd be taken. And by 1675, the mantua had completely blown up in popularity. It was the style that took over women's fashion, and women were able to create their own guild in France. It's from that year that we have the mantua making trade kind of emerge as an actual legal entity. So this is the moment where women were able to really take over women's fashion, and the female mantua maker and also the milliner, who was in charge of all the accessories and was also a female dominated trade, they became the lead creators and the innovators of female fashions. Tailors basically completely lost control of the female fashion industry. They were still making things for women. They were still making the stays, riding habits, and court dress. Now, the way mantua makers worked, they actually cut and fit fabric directly to the body. So the mantua was made in a different way way too, where tailors will take measurement and they will draft flat patterns onto fabric or paper. Mantua makers actually started cutting fabric directly to the body, thus creating the skill that we call draping today. So this is what I mean when I say like mantua makers completely revolutionized how clothing was made for people. Because up until that point, at least like in the couple hundred years leading up to it, people were not cutting directly to the body. They were laying things flat and cutting it out flat and then fitting on the body from there. Honestly, I was like thinking about this when I was writing the script and I was like, do we even drape for men's clothing today? Like, is any men's clothing actually draped or cut to the body? Like, I don't know. My point is this, is that draping is still very much a feminine way to make clothing, and it's a way to make clothing for feminine people. So not only did it revolutionize how different social classes of women could consume fashion, but it also completely just revolutionized middling and lower class women's working lives as well, because now there was actually a dedicated trade for women to go into. Now, women have always been able, like I said, to work in other trades. I've talked about this before in other videos, but women didn't necessarily have all of the rights their male counterparts would have, especially in places like France. And I am kind of talking in this point, guys, just so we're clear, a little bit of France, a little bit of England, a little bit of America. Like I'm kind of weaving these three countries in and out to tell this like broader story, because it's a broader story that you guys need to kind of just basically understand. So I'm kind of bebopping all over the place here. I'm just kind of keep that in mind. The conception of this trade, what it meant is that women now had a much safer and more stable place to earn a living, to acquire upward mobility, to achieve financial independence, whether you were single, married, or a widow, whether you were middle class or lower class. It created and revolutionized women being able to make money. And it is just completely revolutionizing education for women, because to be an apprentice, that means that you were taught not just like how to do the actual skill itself, but you were taught math, you were taught reading, you were taught writing, you were taught just basic business management skills and bookkeeping skills. That was a part of your apprenticeship. In the French records that date for like a good part of the 1700s, I highly recommend this book. I'll have a link to the description below. It has all the information in there. Fabricating Women by Claire Crowston. There was a whole gamut of social status entering the trades, from daughters of service workers to daughters of the bourgeoisie to daughters of other craftspeople and tradespeople. It was very egalitarian for women. Now, apprenticeships usually would last anywhere between like 3 to 7 years. There was a lot of negotiation that would happen, and the average age was around 13. But there are records of apprentices being as young as 6 and being as old as 28 who were starting their apprentice. So it was open to still a wide range of ages, and these trades were so popular, this industry was so successful, like the term mantua maker and milliner also became gendered. If you said someone was a milliner or you said someone was a mantua maker, by calling them just that, you are implying that they are female. And because of how easy it was to get into the mantua making trade, there's low overhead, like you just need a needle and thread and a thimble, like, and some scissors, like, and the knowledge base. It meant that it was also really adaptable to women's lifestyles. So you could be a married mother with children and still also be a mantua maker. You could operate your business out of your home. You could also be an unmarried woman and operate your business out of a storefront that you owned. Or you could actually go into service and you could just basically be the private dressmaker to a aristocratic family. And what's also very fascinating about the mantua making trades and the millinery trades is that these benefits of earning your own income, upward mobility, social status, financial security, it wasn't just for white women either. It actually opened up doors for women of color, and in America in particular, Black women as well. The mantua making trade, or by the 19th century just dressmaking trade, was a very common trade that both enslaved girls and free Black girls would be entered into to learn how to do. It absolutely created an opportunity for a woman to be able to purchase her freedom in the 19th century, and Elizabeth Keckley is probably the most famous example of this in our history. So Elizabeth Keckley was born into slavery, but when she was very young, she was taught what seems to be through an informal sort of apprenticeship, basic mantua making skills, and she was put to work sewing clothing for the entire household. Now this could be for the enslavers and the enslavers' children, this could be for other enslaved people within the household, it could be both. It's hard to say. I don't actually know that information based off of the papers that I was reading about her. But she was still able to develop the mantua making, dressmaking skills. And she became extremely well known for that ability. In fact, one of her enslavers basically sent her out when she was an adult, basically sent her out to work as a dressmaker to earn money for them because they were poor and they didn't have enough money. So they literally just sent her out to do the work to keep them afloat. Now, Keckley was so good at what she did, and she was so good about networking with people and building relationships and building up a solid, good, loyal clientele base, that she was able to acquire funds to purchase her freedom from her clients, and that they pulled the funds together so that way she could purchase her freedom from her enslavers, and then she worked to pay them back. By 1860, she moves to Washington, D.C., and she becomes actually the dressmaker for socialites and well-to-do politicians' wives in D.C. Most famously, if you recognize the name, she was the dressmaker for Mary Todd Lincoln. And I just think that Keckley is such a great example of how mantua making, how dressmaking, how this female-dominated trade gave women this chance to thrive. That not only was it a place for women to express themselves artistically, but it was a place for them to expand their horizons, to grow, to succeed, to be financially independent and unreliant on other people around them, but they could do it themselves. So I cannot stress this enough. The advent of the mantua making trade in the 17th century and the 1600s was such a huge step forward for women's rights, as well as just completely revolutionizing the fashion industry to honestly creating the origins to what we understand it to be today. It is very unusual that we would even know about Elizabeth Keckley, because most mantua makers, regardless of their race, were essentially unknown. Because fashion and the creation of fashion, the creation of your clothes, was honestly an extremely localized experience. It was a part of your local, small, central economy for the vast majority of people. For the extremely wealthy and elite social statuses, especially here in the United States, yes, going over to London and going over to Paris and Europe to have your clothing made was a part of just being of the upper classes here in the United States. And just, because I know someone's gonna say this, no, you were not making your own clothes. Not until the end of the 19th century was that becoming a thing. And I'll get into it in a second, because it's a part of the problem, okay? It's a part of the issue, it's not a good thing, okay? So from the late 1600s up until the very early 20th century, we can now see very clearly that women controlled women's fashions. Women made women's fashions, women wrote about women's fashions. It was the networks of these women across oceans and countries that disseminated fashion information for other women. Women's magazines were written by other women, and it was a woman's network. It was a woman's world, and women were dictating fashions that women wore. So this is where this whole discussion around the patriarchy within historic clothing gets messy. So the thing is when we want to look at historic dress and we see things that we don't understand, like the super wide hoops or corsets, or, the fact that women there for a period kind of looked like deranged centaurs, we want to blame it on the patriarchy, but men weren't involved. They were kept out. I mean, it was just our great-great-great-great-grandmothers just rocking and rolling with some laudanum and some chaos. You know what I mean? They were like, shit, let's go. What other weird thing can we come up with today so that way we can keep women coming into this office and we can keep making dresses? Let's just keep it rolling, ladies. Let's just express ourselves. We got nothing else to do. We're not allowed to hold public office. We're not allowed to vote. Let's just wear clothes and just make all the men around us uncomfortable and physically take up space in the room by having the biggest fucking dresses possible. There's methods to this madness, guys. But let me make this clear. Men did not like this industry. Men did not like that women had this control, that women had these businesses. They did not like seeing how successful these businesses were. And it was that moment when men realized how lucrative the mantua making and millinery trades could be that they started to encroach on the trades, and they start trying to infiltrate their way into these female-dominated spaces because they couldn't let women have it. And I also want to make this as clear as I can too. Women absolutely fought back when men tried this and when men started doing this. We literally have plays and prints and books mocking and ridiculing and just attacking men for trying to come into the millinery and mantua making spaces. They are fighting as best as they can to maintain the control over these trades that they fought so hard for. But by the end of the 19th century, the fashion industry has completely changed again. We have great innovations like the sewing machine and commercial paper pattern, making it easier for women to make clothing at home, thus taking a paid skill and a paid service and making it free to do at home. So no longer do you have to pay this skilled dressmaker over here to make your clothing for you. No, you can just buy a pattern and make it yourself for free because you obviously have the time to do that. It's more economical. Running a household and taking care of raising children, is this not a full-time job now, is it? No, these innovations are helpful. For who? Who are they helpful for? I want to know. Definitely not the mantua maker. Women having to not only make their own clothing while running their entire household and managing that. Who? Who is it better for? The fashion industry was going through another revolution by the mid to late 19th century, and men were infiltrating these female-dominated spaces. And it is this moment that brings me to the father of couture, Worth. So the concept of couture in the way that we sort of know it today, or like couture houses, was established in the 19th century thanks to Charles Frederick Worth. If you want to know more about my feelings of this very mid-level designer who, you know, very repetitive and boring, but was very good at marketing. I already have a video talking about Victorian couture bodices and like couture sewing construction. He did still fundamentally change how people talked about fashion and the fashion industry as a whole. And being able to say like, oh, well,
you know, I'm wearing a Worth, or oh, haha, I'm wearing so-and-so.
Before him, it really wasn't necessarily a thing, or at least a thing that was documented in the same way that it is today. The dressmaker, she was anonymous. And even when we talk about like fashions of the past, we talk about the famous women who wore these beautiful dresses. We don't talk about the women who made their clothes. Dressmakers were successful, but they were ultimately anonymous. And they weren't given credit for their work like designers are today. So this brings me then to female representation in couture houses and in traditional couture houses. First, I want to say this list I'm getting ready to give you is nowhere near comprehensive. This was honestly just me really like racking my own brain of brands that I know of while also like going through like Vogue really quickly to try and like find some that I'm like, oh yes, I recognize this name. And like couture houses also were not like they are today. There was a whole lot of them. Like when you go through an old issue of Vogue, like couturier, 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 couture house, couture house, couture house, it's like it's not as elite as it is today. But I do want to present to you all a list of pre-World War II female-owned, operated, designed couture houses. Jean Lanvin, Schiaparelli, Chanel, gross, Lucille, Paquin, Cheroux, Marjane Lacroix, not Christian Lacroix, but Marjane Lacroix, Jenny, Bouet-Sur, Primette, Calotsure, Madeleine Vionnet, Madame Grech, Louise Boulanger. These women are just exceptional, are just incredible. Incredible designers, incredibly inspirational businesswomen. Now look, were there male couturiers? Absolutely, we know this. Charles Frederick Worth was one of them. There was Paul Ray, Worth. I'm gonna mention Christian Dior, even though he's post-World War II, but yes, he's in there. I like Dior, don't get me wrong. He liked to dress women in their 30s, so I was like, thanks Dior. Pateau, Fortuny, even though Fortuny's wife, she actually has been given the credit for like coming up with a Delphos gown, and she was the one apparently doing actually a lot of the design work and heavy lifting, just under like the broader Fortuny thing, and he being the man got all the credit, and that's the day of our lives. But there's also like House of Dracul and Douillet, and that's just to name a few. But I just want to point out how many female couture houses there were tons. So even with these men encroaching on this female space, even with men in the 19th century trying to take over, women still dominated. Women still were able to be the trendsetters and the fashion designers, and they were doing incredible fucking work. Hey, okay, so while I was editing this beast of a video, I wasn't really happy with the flow of the ending, plus I was doing some additional research that I wanted to incorporate into the conclusion for this video essay. While yes, the requirements to be considered a haute couture house have changed since the 1910s and 20s, the regulations became more strict in the 1940s, we still have 39 houses that are considered haute couture today. And out of those 39 houses, only 10, yes 10, are run by women. And out of those 10, 2, Chanel and Christian Dior, only very recently actually brought on women as creative directors. In fact, Maria Grazia Chiuri, who is the creative director at Christian Dior, is the first female creative director for that house ever in its entire history. And Virginie Viard only just took over at Chanel for Karl Lagerfeld after his passing in 2019. And Lanvin, which is no longer apparently considered haute couture, it is still the oldest fashion house still in operation in France. Lanvin has only ever had 2 other female creative directors other than Jean Lanvin's daughter since Lanvin's passing in the 1940s. Jean Lanvin was one of the most innovative and forward-thinking businesswomen and fashion designers of the early 20th century. And today the house is struggling. And it's struggling to maintain creative directors too. The last female creative director was barely there a year. The issue isn't just that Sean McGeer is now the creative director at Alexander McQueen. Alexander McQueen was also a man. And it's not even the fact that there are men who are designing women's clothing. Christian Siriano and Daniel Roseberry both do incredible work, though I do think it's important to point out that Daniel Roseberry is the creative director of Schiaparelli. The issue is this: the women's apparel industry is a $907 billion industry. The majority of students at fashion design schools are women. And out of the 40 million garment workers around the world, 85% of them are also women, but only 10 out of the 39 haute couture houses are run by women. The majority of design houses that sit at the pinnacle of fashion, that are meant to dictate female fashion specifically and trickle that out and down into the masses, are run by men, specifically white men. And as a historian, specifically of dressmakers and mantua makers, as a collector of antique women's clothing, in part because I want to preserve these pieces of women's history and keep their stories alive and feel this connection to these women, these anonymous women who made these clothing, it is so upsetting to see an industry that was so deeply connected to women's rights, independence, and autonomy be stripped away from us, inch by inch and stitch by stitch. That women are now being relegated to the back workrooms of cutters, drapers, fitters, and the seamstresses, given all of the labor, all of the work, but none of the credit and none of the pay. It is the fact that in 2023, our fashion industry looks more similar to the 1600s than it does to the 1800s. And this is ultimately why I think so many people just assume that the patriarchy has always had this influence on women's clothing. When we actually look at the historic record and we look at historic fact, you can see that it's not really the case. It's not really true. But because we have a patriarchy problem in fashion today, we can't help but just assume that it must have been worse back then. So with all that being said, I am grateful for this hullabaloo about Sean McGeer's hiring at Alexander McQueen, because it's given me a great opportunity to tell you all the story of the mantua making trade and of mantua makers, which is honestly something I've been wanting to talk to you guys about for a while now. And so with that, my friends, just remember, the clothes that are in your closet, the clothes that you currently have on, those are all made by human hands. Most of them women. Do you want to go cut out dicks upstairs and poops?
Sure.
I'm recording all this. Hi. If I was single, would you want to date me? Absolutely not. It means you're my child. Perfect. Again. Give me chaos. Hey, don't forget to smash that like button if you enjoyed the video. Ooh, she touched my tra-la-la. Ooh, my ding-ding-dong.
Start dancing to the beat.
Boots and cats and 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 boots.